Great to have you along for the ride. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Always glad to have this guy on. He's District 1 Republican, the great state of Florida. It's Matt Gaetz. Matt, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm great. Great to be on the show. Great to be with you, Joe. I've just stepped off the floor where the Democrats have had really, I think, the craziest vote of all of 2022. Can't wait to let folks hear about it.
Well, the thing is, the craziest vote would be hard to do because every vote so far has been pretty nutty. These things aren't making sense, what we're seeing them push. And then you had 27 of your brethren, I think, say no to protecting Supreme Court justices, which we've got to talk about. But this is breaking news. You're just off the floor. Fill me in. This is the Maxine Waters bill, right?
Right. So all of America is getting crushed by inflation right now.
Yeah.
Middle income, low income people getting crushed the worst. And what we've heard from the Biden administration is that they want to be hands off to the Fed. Just let the Fed do what they do, essentially absolving themselves of responsibilities that come with leadership, but not Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi. They moved a bill off the floor of the House just moments ago that is the Financial Services Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Economic Justice Act. So what they want the Fed doing is actually treating people differently in the American economy based on race. They want the Fed to use its powerful tools to be able to force equity among the races. I am not kidding you. They even want federally mandated maps of minority banks, mandated federal deposits in minority banks. They want to track the diversity in corporate governance, and they want to create requirements for diversity and inclusion ratings for the banks. So whether or not you're able to get a competitive interest rate on your loan might depend on how woke your bank is. I thought that the financial sector would be like the next iteration of cancel culture, but we see it right here. And it's not only that they're ignoring the very real problem of inflation caused by their own policies, printing trillions of dollars with no plan, engaging in the sanctions regime with no plan for the American supply chain and the American consumer. And now they think what the economy needs is more wokeness, more racial quotas, and I would say more racism at the Fed.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. And the reason they're doing it is for votes. It's Matt Gaetz. Go to gaetz.house.gov/firebrand. Matt, a couple of years ago, you and I probably would have said this will never happen. That'd be kind of silly. But they keep on doing it. It's not only with that, it's with grades. It's with getting your way into a college or a university. They are dumbing down our society, pretending like minorities are stupid. And minorities are actually against this. Just like the whole defund the police, 70 to 80% of all black Americans didn't want to defund the police. So when a minority hears that we can't have voter ID because black people allegedly don't have them, they feel as though they're being racist against. They're being prejudged. When you hear something like this, you've got to do something extra and special for me so I can bank, so I can get a loan. Black people, Hispanic people, other than white Christian men, are going to revolt, aren't they, Matt? They don't want to be treated like less than.
I think back to all of these school boards that tried to put critical race theory in the classroom, and the most vociferous responses coming from black parents who were so deeply offended that they were so fragile that their children had to be taught that they were oppressed in the United States of America today. But what this shows is that the left is willing to engage every vector of potential control they have in order to maintain power. They literally want power over your banks to track their diversity and inclusion programs so that they can punish those who don't see the world the way they do and who don't adopt a totally leftist ideology on everything from your interest rates to what bathrooms you're allowed to go to. So I think that it's very telling. I expect this to die in the Senate, but the American voter should hold Democrats responsible for failing them with one hand and then picking a fight with them with the other.
Yeah, it's District 1 Republican, the great state of Florida, Matt Gaetz. This goes right into my next question about what's happening in the Rio Grande Valley when it comes to representation. The left in this country really believes, Matt, that Hispanic Americans or Latinos or Latins or whatever we're calling people who are of that ethnicity somehow want more illegal immigration. Of course they don't. And every single vote since 2020, Trump did great in South Florida. He did great in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where I am. And now we see Mayra Flores, who wins a seat that hasn't been held by a Republican since 18-something. And it was only held for 1 year in 18-something by a Republican. She wins rather easily. And now she's on a pace to possibly win in November and get 2 years. This is a district where you've got an influx of those illegally coming here that is nonstop. Did they overestimate that Hispanics in America, those who came here legally, those who are Americans of that background, would somehow want more illegal immigration?
Well, I think Democrats are getting crushed with Hispanics in South Florida and in the Rio Grande, actually for very different reasons. I think in the Rio Grande, a lot of these border communities resent the fact that Joe Biden's policies have turned them into a turnstile.
Right.
The entire country. And that, like, not just people from Mexico or even the Northern Triangle, but people from Sri Lanka and from Romania and all over the world now get the joke that America isn't serious about having a border at all. And so it's not a racial element. I don't think people view illegal immigration through the lens of race. I think you look at it through the lens of just having a border and the rule of law and the sanctity of a nation that should care about itself. And in South Florida, you have a lot of Hispanics from South America who are escaping socialism, and they see so clearly. I mean, I had a couple from Cuba come to a campaign event I had recently, and they were desperate. They said to me, Matt, you must not allow our country to fall into the socialism that was so vicious and so violent and so just caused so much despair in Cuba and frankly in other parts of the Caribbean and in South America. So we see that clearly in Florida. I think folks see it in Texas, and they're not going to be able to just play the race card on the left anymore. They're actually going to have to make substantive arguments. And if their substantive argument, like we saw today, is we need more race baiting, racist wokeism, and not an economy that lifts up everyone. President Trump, there was something magical about how egalitarian Make America Great Again really felt to a lot of people, because we all got to be a part of it when there were better 401ks, when there were rising wages, when there was more capital investment in our country. There was something very unifying about that roaring economy and that sense of productivity and success. Now what we have is Joe Biden in decline, an economy in despair, everyone thinking that tomorrow is going to be worse than today, and that's what we've got to break through.
And those saying Make America Great Again was racist were, in fact, the racists that knew that they would lose their grips on people if people bought into the idea that it was really all for one, one for all, e pluribus unum. It's Matt Gaetz. Matt, as far as the Hispanic thing goes, I want to finish on this. Do you think that it's a service of, I grew up in South Florida. I was there when the Chrome Detention Center was happening. I've been here in Texas now 17 years. I've got Hispanics around me. My best friends are Hispanic. I mean, that's great. Do you think it's a service of them waking up to the fact that they are Christians, conservatives, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, that they're people who believe in the traditional American promise and value system? Are they waking up to that and they're forgetting that Grandma and Grandpa were blue dog Democrats who really were sort of moderate Republicans, but they all voted Democrat? Is that what's happening generationally, do you think?
Well, I think there may have been some slow migration on those issues, but we really hit this cataclysmic event in the summer of 2020 where Hispanics just started coming our way in droves, and I think it was the riots. I mean, I think for a lot of Hispanic communities, they're builders. They build strong families, strong churches, like you said. A lot of them are in the trade craft and involved in seeing things improve and be advanced. And when you saw a political movement on the left that was driven by destruction and tearing things down and violence, that was very off-putting to a lot of Hispanics. And that, I think, was the big motivator to get them red-pilled.
Very interesting to see it happening, and you and I can talk about it all day, but for some reason the handlers of Joe Biden are not reacting, and I'm not mad at that because I want November to be the figurative bloodshed in the House and the Senate that it should be. But I mean, at some point, the leader of the free world needs to either wake up, whoever's pulling his strings needs to wake up and realize, holy crap, what we're doing isn't working. Are you kind of buoyed by the fact that they don't get it, or do you want them to start getting it because Americans are suffering?
So they think in the White House that the answer is to get Joe Biden out on the road more. And for a lot of Democrats in vulnerable districts, Joe Biden showing up would be a drag on them.
They don't want him there, right?
Yeah, so they've got to figure out places for him to go. I mean, I think they sent him to a union hall to, I think make some rather, bizarre pronouncements about his economic plan.
Yes.
He went to the port of Long Beach where he said the real problem in the American economy is that Americans don't understand the supply chain enough, and that we're all actually paying a Putin tax, that inflation is really just a Putin tax.
Wow.
I mean, What is the left going to do in America when Vladimir Putin's not around anymore?
Right.
He is at fault for everything from the 2016 election up to Joe Biden's inflation. Vladimir Putin did all of it, apparently. And when there's no Vladimir Putin to kick around anymore, I just don't know who's going to be the new boogeyman for the left.
That guy goes like 5'7", and he's just the biggest figure in the heads of everybody in Washington. It's the strangest thing. It's Matt Gaetz. Make sure that you check out his podcast. It's called Firebrand. He's amazing in what he does, standing up for true American values. Let's talk about January 6th. We've talked about this many times before, Matt. And as I watch it, I know and you know that January 6th was but a date that you can challenge electors. You can challenge the delegates and the votes that were sent in. This is something Jamie Raskin did in 2016 against Donald Trump, I believe, for the Florida vote. Maxine Waters has done this over and over. Hillary Clinton has said it wasn't a legitimate election since 2016. In fact, you can go back to like 2001, and Democrats have been every single time there's an election where a Republican wins, they have constantly challenged it. Never a problem. It's not any sort of an attack on democracy. It's not an insurrection. So this president, President Trump, has a speech. He says, peacefully go and make your voices heard. Let them know what you want them to do. And some idiots rioted. Now, he offered up a bunch of National Guard troops. I know that. Kash Patel has shown us the documents that this went through the chain of command. They could have had 10 to 20,000. They said no. And now still there's this kabuki theater that's being produced by like ABC News producers where everybody's wearing a bunch of makeup and they're doing like some made-for-TV drama. Matt, what are we looking at here? Why are they still doing this knowing that what they're saying is verifiably wrong and the committee isn't even legal?
For context, the last Republican to be sworn in as president without some challenge to their electors was George Herbert Walker Bush.
Come on.
Okay, that's the last time. Okay, Jim McGovern, the Democrat chair of the Rules Committee, objected to the state of Alabama under President Trump, which President Trump won by more than 40 points. Okay, so what the American people have to understand is regularly, actually always, the process of getting a president sworn in includes members presenting some panoply of challenges to electors where there's concerns about elections. Sometimes those challenges ripen into broader reforms on the election process. Sometimes it's just people giving blathering speeches. But in no circumstance has it ever invited violence before. And we are universally opposed to political violence in this country. And so for the January 6th committee now to put on this dog and pony show, here's what I think is probably the most egregious part of it, Joe. They have the staff members reading off of teleprompters in like the darkened committee room to provide hearsay upon hearsay evidence to the American people. So I'm like kind of wondering, like, did they go and get these staff members out of Hollywood, out of central casting? Like, if you wanted to be an investigator on the January 6th committee, did you have to show that you could read off of a teleprompter first and that was like your principal skill set? The direct evidence here doesn't exist connecting President Trump to any sort of crime or anyone else. You know how you know that? Even the FBI, who have no love for President Trump and who I think don't treat conservatives fairly, they came out and said there was no unified plan here. This was a chaotic riot that was not centrally driven or motivated by anything. Now, there's some people who think the reason the FBI came out and said that is because if there was a central motivating premise, it may have very well been the FBI.
Right.
And we can look back to the Governor Whitmer kidnapping that was largely an entrapment inspired by the FBI as an example for the very blueprint that might have been used on January 6th. But under no circumstance is there evidence for this like criminal referral that they want to be building toward with President Trump. But look, the American people, at the end of the day, no matter how you feel about January 6th, it's still a lot harder for all of you to fill up the gas tank.
Yeah.
And whether you think that was a bad day, a day that we have to relive, every day for the rest of our lives into eternity, your grocery basket is still costing a lot more. And that's because of the failed policies of this administration. That's not Vladimir Putin. It's not some global trend that we all just have to take part in. It's because these people printed trillions of dollars. And when they did so, they devalued the American dollar. They devalued the most important institution in the American economy. And when they did that, they caused harm that we are paying for now.
Well, if nothing else, showing these on primetime television in front of millions, and by the way, some sitcom or something did better than the show, but doing it now shows a level of tone deafness that I don't think they can ever get away from. It doesn't make any sense. You've got one guy in the committee saying, we're not even thinking about charges. Liz Cheney says, well, wait a second, we might do some charges. At the end of the day, if you don't have John Sullivan up there, the Antifa instigator, you don't have Ray Epps up there, we still don't know who the hell Ray Epps is, if you don't have the 14,000 hours of video that we're not allowed to see, and if you don't have 5 legitimate Republicans that were chosen by the Republican leader of the House, then you've got something that's a sham. But Matt, what about that one point you just very eloquently brought us to, where we're all worried? Interest rates are going up now. Hyperinflation is upon us. You can't afford to buy anything anymore. You can't go on vacation anymore. You can't fill up your tank anymore. And these people are doing kabuki theater at the same time. There's a disconnect, isn't there? And do you think the American public notices the disconnect and who's doing it?
Look, I've been involved in every election cycle since 1994, and I think a universal principle in American politics is that voters punish politicians who they think are being selfish.
Yes.
And I know that there are people on the January 6th committee who probably felt a great deal of personal trauma on that day for a variety of reasons. And I don't want anyone to be so convicted by that they're not able to live a fulfilling life. But the trauma that millions of Americans are feeling right now as a consequence of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's failures, that ought to be the acute interest of our Congress. And when we indulge in our own traumas and we engage in all of this pageantry to indulge ourselves, I think there's a risk that these Democrats and their Republican puppets will look incredibly selfish. And I do believe there's a prospect for voters punishing them as a consequence. It's
Matt Gaetz, District 1 Republican, great state of Florida. Matt, I know you got to run. Give me 10 seconds on this. Do you impeach Mayorkas day one should you get the House back?
I believe that Joe Biden's purposeful actions to dissolve the American border justify his impeachment. And so I think that we ought to impeach Joe Biden over the border. Certainly, Mayorkas won't be around anymore. I don't believe Mayorkas wants to live in a world in which he has to show up and answer questions from Republicans when we hold the gavels and can hold him accountable. So I would expect his prompt departure after the midterms. But it's Joe Biden who has allowed our border to become just a total black eye for our country. And the American people don't deserve that. And those communities on the Rio Grande Valley that you're very attentive to don't deserve it especially.
He's fighting for Florida every day, fighting for America every day. Matt, I appreciate what you're doing. It is Matt Gaetz, U.S. Representative, District 1 from the great state of Florida, where I call my stomping grounds. Also, we met last time I was there, and it's one of the coolest pictures. I feel like a doofus. I didn't have the sunglasses on. Had I had the sunglasses on, we would have been like the Blues Brothers. Matt, I appreciate you, brother. Good to see you.
Florida misses you, man. You're welcome back as a Florida man anytime.
All right, brother. We're back after this. Stay right here.
Take care.